The night Simon Hale realized that sometimes the biggest mistake isn't staying too long but leaving too soon, he was standing in the break room of a third-floor architecture firm in Portland watching rain streak down the windows while his coffee went cold in his hand. Simon was 41, a restoration draftsman who spent his days translating crumbling historic buildings into clean technical drawings that contractors could actually use. He'd been divorced 3 years earlier from a woman who loved the idea of a careful man until careful started looking too much like predictable, and since then he'd built a life that was quiet, stable, and mostly fine. He worked, he went home to his apartment near the river, he read, he slept. It wasn't lonely exactly, it was just very still. The firm had recently hired a project coordinator named Claire Novak, a woman in her late 30s with dark blonde hair, usually twisted up in a clip that never quite held, reading glasses she wore on a cord like someone's favorite librarian, and a habit of leaving half-finished cups of tea on every flat surface in the office. She was sharp, organized, and had a dry sense of humor that surfaced at strange moments, usually when someone else was taking themselves too seriously. Simon had worked with her on 2 renovation projects over the past 6 months. They developed an easy rhythm. She'd drop a site folder on his desk. He'd catch an error in the estimates. She'd fix it without defensiveness. He'd stay late to finish a drawing. She'd bring him coffee without asking. It wasn't romance. It was just the kind of low-friction partnership that made 40-hour weeks bearable. But then Simon's brother called from Seattle with an offer to join his commercial firm at nearly double the salary, and Simon, who'd been telling himself for 3 years that he was fine where he was, surprised himself by saying yes. He gave his 2 weeks' notice on a Tuesday morning. His boss took it well. His coworkers congratulated him. And Claire, who was standing near the copier when he made the announcement, looked at him for a long moment, nodded once and said, "Good for you, Simon." Then she walked back to her desk. He told himself the tightness in his chest was just nerves about the move. The first week of his notice period passed in a blur of exit interviews and handoff meetings. Claire stayed professional, polite, and distant. She stopped bringing him coffee. She stopped dropping folders on his desk with her usual commentary. When they passed in the hallway, she smiled the way you smile at someone you used to know. Simon told himself it was normal. People pulled back when you were leaving. It didn't mean anything. But on the Friday afternoon of his final week, Claire knocked on the doorframe of his office just as he was packing up the last of his reference books. The building was nearly empty. Most people left early on Fridays. Rain was falling again, soft and persistent, turning the streetlights outside into smudged halos of gold. "Hey," she said. Her voice was quieter than usual. Simon looked up. "Hey, Atenitenstein." She hesitated in the doorway, arms folded, her reading glasses hanging against her sweater. "You have a minute?" "Yeah, of course. So natin." She stepped inside, closed the door behind her, and leaned against it. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just looked at him, and there was something in her expression that Simon couldn't quite name. Something careful and unsteady at the same time. "I know you're leaving," she said finally. "And I know it's a good opportunity. I do. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." Simon set down the book he was holding. His pulse kicked up. "Okay. Are you leaving because you want to go to Seattle, or are you leaving because it's easier than staying here?" Andinda Andersen Deston. The question landed like a stone in still water. Simon opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't have an answer ready because he hadn't let himself ask the question in the first place. Nisider Sandidir Sandinens. Claire didn't wait for him to recover. She pushed off the door and crossed the small office until she was standing just a few feet away, close enough that he could see the faint smudge of ink on her thumb from a leaking pen and the tension in the way she was holding her shoulders. Because if you're leaving because you think there's nothing here worth staying for, she said, her voice dropping even lower, then you're wrong. Simon stared at her. His throat felt tight. Claire, I'm not asking you to stay, she said quickly. I'm not going to guilt you or make this harder than it already is. But I need you to know that these past 6 months, working with you, talking to you, just being around you, it's been the best part of my week. Every week. And I didn't say anything because I didn't want to make it weird, and because I thought maybe I was imagining it, but then you gave your notice and I realized I was about to lose the chance to say it at all. She stopped. Her hands were shaking slightly. She shoved them into her pockets. Simon couldn't breathe, so he'd spent 3 years telling himself he was fine alone, that the next relationship would come when it came, that he didn't need to look for it. And the entire time, Claire had been right there, right across the hall, bringing him coffee and catching his mistakes and making him laugh when he didn't expect it. I didn't know, he said quietly. I know, Claire said. That's why I'm telling you now. The rain outside picked up, drumming against the window. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed. The building settled into evening silence. Simon took a step closer. What if I told you I've been looking forward to Monday mornings for the first time in years, and it took me until last Tuesday to figure out why? Claire's breath hitched. I'd ask why you didn't say something. Destiny. Nee, because I thought you were just being nice. Understand. I'm never just nice, Simon. Ask anyone. Ater natentilit turbines. Dem. He laughed, and the sound broke something open in his chest. Yeah, I know. Asinisiden near in me. She smiled, but it was unsteady. So what now? Simon didn't have an answer. He had a lease signed in Seattle. He had a start date. He had a brother expecting him and a life he'd already committed to dismantling here. But he also had Claire standing 3 feet away, looking at him like he mattered, and for the first time in 3 years, the idea of walking away from something good made him feel like he was making the wrong choice for all the right reasons. I don't know, he said honestly, but I don't want to leave like this. Like what? Like I'm running. Claire's expression softened. She stepped closer, close enough now that he could smell the faint scent of her shampoo, something clean and herbal, and see the gold flecks in her eyes that he'd never noticed before. Then don't, she said quietly. Simon reached out slowly, carefully, the way you reach for something fragile, and took her hand. Her fingers were cold. She didn't pull away. I leave in 9 days, he said. I know. That's not a lot of time. No, Claire agreed. It's not. But I'd like to spend some of it with you. If you want. Ansansin. She looked down at their hands, then back up at him, and for the first time since he'd given his notice, she smiled the real smile, the one that made the corners of her eyes crinkle. I'd love that, she said. They went to dinner that night at a small Italian place near the waterfront where the tables were too close together and the menu was printed on paper that looked like it had been photocopied in 1987. Claire ordered something with too much garlic. Simon ordered something with too much cheese. They talked about work, then about books, then about the strange, specific loneliness of being single in your late 30s when everyone around you had already paired off and moved on. She told him about her ex-fiancé, a man who'd loved her competence but hated her independence, who'd wanted a partner who'd organize his life but never question his decisions. Simon told her about his ex-wife, who'd wanted adventure but punished him for not providing it. Sounds like we both picked people who wanted edited versions of us, Claire said. Yeah, Simon said. I think we did. Ascendinsin or Asirdi. She set her fork down and looked at him across the table. The restaurant was loud and warm and smelled like bread and wine. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shining under the streetlights. And... Can I ask you something? she said. After tonight, I feel like I should be nervous. She smiled. You probably should. She paused. Are you always this careful? Sandy depends what I'm trying not to break. Under Tinso. She didn't answer right away. When she looked back, her expression had changed. Softer, more open. Well, she said quietly, for the record, I'm not made of glass. Simon's heart kicked hard against his ribs. He reached across the table and took her hand again, and this time he didn't let go. They spent the weekend together. Saturday morning, they met for coffee at a place near Powell's and then spent 3 hours wandering the bookstore, pulling volumes off shelves and reading passages aloud to each other like teenagers. Sunday, Claire brought him to her apartment, a small one-bedroom in Selwood with plants on every windowsill and a couch covered in blankets, and they made pasta from scratch, which turned out lumpy and overcooked but tasted perfect anyway because they were laughing too hard to care. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Simon realized he'd been wrong. He wasn't fine. He'd been empty, and Claire had filled the space so quietly he hadn't noticed until it was too late to pretend he didn't need it. On Monday morning, Simon's brother called to confirm the move-in date. Simon stood in his apartment, phone in hand, looking at the boxes he'd already packed and felt the weight of the decision settle over him like a coat he'd been wearing for too long. That night, he met Claire at her favorite bar, a narrow brick-walled place with mismatched stools and a bartender who knew her order without asking. They sat in the back corner. The lighting was low and warm. Someone was playing jazz on the house speakers, something slow and minor key. I need to tell you something, Simon said. Claire set her glass down. Okay. I called my brother this afternoon. I told him I'm not coming. She went very still. Simon, I know what you're going to say. It's a huge opportunity. It's more money. It's a fresh start. And you're right. It is all of those things. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and looked at her directly. But I don't want a fresh start. I want this. I want you. And I'm tired of making decisions based on what sounds good on paper instead of what actually makes me happy. Claire's eyes were bright. She blinked hard, then looked away, laughing a little, shaky. You're going to make me cry in public. Is that a yes? Asim the breeze. She looked back at him, and her smile was trembling at the edges but real. That's a yes. Simon kissed her then, leaning across the scarred wooden table, tasting the wine on her lips and feeling her hand come up to touch his face, and for the first time in 3 years, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. 6 months later, Simon and Claire moved into a small house near Laurelhurst Park with a backyard full of overgrown rose bushes and a kitchen window that looked out over the neighborhood. Simon took a position at a smaller firm that paid less but let him work on projects he actually cared about. Claire got promoted. They adopted a dog, an anxious greyhound named Iris, who refused to walk in the rain and slept between them every night. And one Saturday morning in early spring, Simon woke up to find Claire sitting on the porch steps with coffee and a book, her hair loose around her shoulders, morning light turning everything golden. And he thought about the night he almost walked away from this, and how close he'd come to mistaking leaving for bravery. He sat down beside her. She leaned into him without looking up from her book. Hey, she said. Hey, you know what I was thinking? What? I'm really glad you stayed. Simon kissed the top of her head. And me too. What would you have done if someone told you they were leaving and you realized you'd been falling for them the whole time? And have you ever almost lost something before you understood how much it mattered? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.